through. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Do you know the show The Office? All right. I was afraid of that. I was never a big fan of The Office, but The Office was a very popular sitcom over the last 10, 15 years or so, and I think is it off the air now? I think it might be off the air now. Carell, what's his first name? Steve. Steve was the major player on the Carell, on the Office. But anyway, there was one scene that I remember that you can go look it up on YouTube. It's a very funny scene, but Michael Scott, the character played by Steve Carell, and Dwight are driving in a car together. And Michael's driving, Dwight's the navigator, following the information on the GPS. He and Dwight are arguing about the recent command to turn right. Dwight is adamant that the GPS means to turn right at the corner. And Michael is saying, no, it's to turn right now. Okay? And since Michael is driving, he ignores Dwight and makes the turn immediately as instructed and drives the car straight into a lake. It is a funny scene, but I understand the impulse. Sometimes I'm tempted to follow the GPS that way too. I can see the restaurant right in front of me, where I'm going, and the GPS is telling me to make a U-turn. And just for a minute, I hesitate. Just for a minute. They should put a warning label on all GPS devices that read, "Do not operate without common sense." A similar label should be affixed to every cover of every Bible. Use common sense while reading this. Our topic of conversation today needs a little common sense to understand and digest properly. You'll see. This is part 3 of our discussion on discipleship. We've talked about faith, that the way we respond back to God after seeing all He has done towards us and all He is doing towards us. We've talked about faith, and then we've talked about service. And this morning, we're going to talk about behavior. How do we act in the world? So for several weeks, we've been in this discussion to formulate our church identity. We've been discussing the primary differences between evangelical thinking, represented by the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, and the inclusive theology of the Presbyterian Church of America. If we are not evangelical, then who are we? Or what are we? Or where do we stand? That's been our conversation. Another way of seeing is the heading we've used. And nowhere is this difference more pronounced and more nuanced and more subtle than in this topic of Christian behavior. The way we understand this subject matter has the power to undermine or support everything the church says it believes. So it's pretty big. Pretty important. So here's the way evangelical communities tend to understand behavioral choices. And when I say evangelical communities, I'm not saying all or everyone in those communities. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that generally speaking, this is the flavor that you would receive. In evangelical theology or thinking, God's primary motivation, his primary reason for sending Jesus to earth to die as a sacrifice for your sin, his primary motivation in loving us is to get human beings to follow the rules. That's the end game. The ultimate end game of the whole thing is to get you and me to shape up. The final purpose for God's work on earth is to get humans to stop sinning. And in the evangelical world, this is very important, if you do not begin to sin less, the sincerity of your commitment to Jesus is suspect. You must not really believe correctly or good enough or strong enough if you are not demonstrating a greater commitment to following the rules. Although evangelical theology talks a lot about God's love, God's grace, and faith, and trust, in the end, God has, this is the way it always felt to me, an ulterior motive. Now that God has done all that for you, God expects you to shape up, obey the rules, get in line, and stop doing bad things. If I perceive someone has an ulterior motive for loving me, friends, I will not feel loved, ever. If I perceive that there's an ulterior motive, how many of you feel loved by used car salesmen? Everybody feel loved? But they're so nice. They're so kind. They're just, oh, how are you? Good to see you, Joe. How's that? You know, how come you don't feel loved? Because you know they're out there just to sell you a car. And when I say this, and this is the common sense part, okay? So let's just common sense here. I'm not saying that keeping the laws of God are bad or wrong or a mistake. The law's good. It's good. It's good not to murder. Don't do that. Don't go murder. It's good not to lie. It's good not to steal or covet or hate. It's good not to jump off 10-story buildings, too. It's good not to poke hot sticks in your eye. Good is good. No argument about that. I'm not saying it's not. It is good. That's what Paul's saying in Romans. The law of God is good. But in the evangelical mindset, the absolute perfect world is where no one sins ever again. That's the perfect world. That's the ultimate end game. Everyone acting in accordance with God's laws. That's observation 1. Observation 2. The evangelical system views good behavior as the primary way to be a good witness of God's love in the world. Moral practices of Christian people is the way we attract non-Christian people to God and to the church. They will see our good behaviors and want to join us, want to buy from us. The witness of the church depends upon moral and behavioral superiority. If we act better as better people, they will be impressed. Which is always, this is always a dilemma for people who think along these lines. And this is the dilemma. It's always a dilemma to find happy, caring, giving, kind-hearted, non-Christian people. It's always a dilemma. Because how are you supposed to reach them if you can't be somehow better? If they're as good as we are, what's the bait? Third, and here's the kicker. Here's where it gets difficult. It is one of the church's primary responsibilities to make sure that people are behaving properly. God needs our help in shaping people up. Needs the church's help in shaping people up. By the way, this precedes evangelicalism also. Since this is viewed as the main objective of God, it must be the ultimate objective of the church. In the evangelical system, folks, you will get kicked out, told you are not welcome because you are not living according to their definition of acceptable behavior. Did you hear what I just said? You will get kicked out. So therefore, my advice to you, hide. Which is what happens, right? Just pretend that we're shaped up. By the way, what is the latest definition of acceptable behavior often changes over time. There was a time where you could be dealt with in the evangelical community if you danced. Yes, that's true. If you drank, if you went to the movies, if you played cards. Now, if you're bad at playing cards, you probably shouldn't play cards. Okay, I'm not. Or if you played with dice. I worked on a Christian college campus for a number of years. And the joke there was that God is against premarital sex because it might lead to dancing. But in this system, it is the church's job to shape people up and potentially get rid of people who fail to behave properly. And you need to do this, by the way, because you must make an example for others. Since it's the church's main job to maintain sinless purity, people need to know that if they don't measure up or if they're not measuring up, they're going to be dealt with too. So this is the church as the moral police. Is that who we are? Very subtle. Very difficult. All right, so let's look at some alternatives. In the inclusive theology of the PCUSA, how would we talk about this? The first thing is something that needs to be very clear, and we must not waver on this. I will never waver on this. Making good behavioral choices, no matter how important, is not the most important thing about being a Christian. And definitely it's definitely not the most Christian thing about being the church. Did you get that? As good as the law is, and it's very good, there is something more important than getting people to follow it. There's something more important. So let's look at our text just for a minute. The Pharisees come to Jesus to test him, as they always did. They ask him his opinion on which is the greatest commandment. Which behavioral standard is the most important one to keep? Groups of people that where their behaviors are the most important thing about them love these kinds of discussions. Which one is more important to keep, and which one can I kind of let slide? We used to have those kinds of discussions. I remember those. Ours would go something like this: is it okay to square dance? What about is that dancing? You think I'm kidding? This was debate in our college, and you would think that we just won, independence when they finally voted that square dancing was okay. Or can you tap your foot to music? With that, is that okay? Or what about head bobbing? In other words, these are the kinds of questions when the most important thing is behavioral control. then these kinds of questions are very important. So how does Jesus respond? He answers them using their own tradition. He quotes the Shema. And the Shema, which means witness in Hebrew, is the most famous prayer of Judaism. He doesn't quote the beginning part, but essentially what he said, the Shema goes like this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. God's eternal commitment to be their people. God is not divided. He is your God. And then the intended response comes next. You shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole strength. And Jesus uses these words. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then he adds a second one that's not in the Shema, which extends this love towards others, the same kind of love towards others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You will treat others the way you wish to be treated. On these two commandments, Jesus says, hangs the whole law and the prophets. It's the summary of the whole thing. Love God and love others. And with that simple answer, Jesus calls into question their system of moral superiority. He shows them that they've strayed from their own tradition and reminds them that behavior is a matter of the heart. For inclusive theology of the PCUSA, the most important thing to God is not our submission to his rules, keeping the letter of the law, passing judgment or punishment on those who disobey. It's not trying to get everybody to shape up and sin less, which is futile and counterproductive anyway, isn't it? No. God's ultimate desire for us, ultimate design for us, is to help us and to draw us into love. Help us know about God's love and help us learn how to show that love to those around us. Because in love, we experience the true spirit of what God is about. Not a moral noose around our necks and a message to fall in line or get it in the neck. No, but a freedom to be ourselves, to be honest, to be loved for who we are without condition, and to return that love to God and to others. A matter of the heart. I'm telling you, this is nuanced. How does he do that? How does God help us love? Does he threaten us? Coerce us? Can you get someone to love by coercing them? Tell us he's going to kick us out or punish us if we don't cooperate? No. He takes our sins into himself and loves us without condition and without end and without reserve, and he doesn't take it back ever. True, honest love for God and others can never and will never be generated by keeping the law, even if we could keep it. As a church, we care about people's behaviors. Of course we do. But not because behavior reflects badly on the organization, but because we care about each other. And if someone is struggling, we want to help them in that struggle. Of course. Common sense. I want to say something about confession and worship. I want to say something about the prayer of confession and worship. The prayer of confession in worship is there not so that we can be reminded to shape up, not so that we can make us all feel shamed and get us to try harder next week. That's not what confession is for. Confession is so that we can be reminded right from the beginning that we're all in the same boat. We're all imperfect, right? And that's exactly where we embrace God's unconditional love, in that place of honesty That's why the church is so messy. Because it's made up of real people. It's messy. Don't try to clean it up. It's God's mess. God likes the mess. God works with messes. Because you know what? That's all he has. That's all he's got. Everywhere in the world, we're told we don't measure up. Everywhere. I used to talk to the students about this all the time, wherever they go. We're not smart enough. We're not tall enough. We're not thin enough or wise enough or rich enough or holy enough. Every day we face the shaming message coming from everywhere. I was with our granddaughter this week having a great time with her. Our daughter came over from Walnut Creek to visit, and we hung out together, and we were in the pool. And she's now 2. I think she's perfect, by the way. Have I told you that before? I baptized her here 5 months ago. Many of you remember. So in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we declared her loved, accepted, valued, and welcomed in God's family without condition, without reserve. That's what we did when we baptized her. And as I looked at her this week, so free and so alive, so unique, I wondered to myself, because I was in the middle of this study, I wondered to myself, when would be the first time that someone would say to her that she is less than acceptable or less valued or less loved? I wondered when she would feel for the first time that maybe she wasn't good enough. And it's just a thing that Grandpa says. And then I had a horrible thought, because I wonder if she'll hear that in a church. What happens if the church, the place that exists primarily to counter that message of conditional love, what happens when it gives in to the culture and just proclaims by word and action the same empty story of shame, performance, punishment, and condemnation? What happens? Now where do people go? Where the idea of grace is just that, an idea used as a punchline, but it's not lived. It's not practiced. Sure, the church may persuade someone to stop doing a bad thing for a few days by threatening banishment or humiliation, but at what cost? What cost? Who will tell people if not the church that no matter what we have done, or how many bad choices we have made, or how far we have wandered, God will never leave us or forsake us? And what possible message is more important than that, I ask you? This is the message of the church. Love proclaimed, love lived, and love passed on to others. So, Beth was our volunteer on Thursday. She was helping Sue and I unload my books. And in one of the boxes, I came across this book. Everyone know this book? She said she used to read it to her children all the time, and she could never get through it without crying. And I'm afraid I'm probably not going to be able to either today. But this book is called I Love You, or Love You Forever. And we used to read it to our kids too. A mother held her new baby and very slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The baby grew, he grew, and he grew, and he grew. He grew until he was 2 years old, and he ran all around the house and pulled all the books off the shelves and pulled all the food out of the refrigerator and took his mother's watch and flushed it down the toilet. And sometimes his mother would say, "This kid is driving me crazy." But at nighttime, when that 2-year-old was quiet, she opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, looked up over the side of his bed, and if he was really asleep, she picked him up and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." The little boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was 9 years old. And he never wanted to come in for dinner, never wanted to take a bath. And when Grandma visited, he always said bad words. Sometimes his mother wanted to sell him to the zoo. But at nighttime, when he was asleep, the mother quietly opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, looked up over the side of the bed, and if he was really asleep, she picked up that 9-year-old boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." The boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a teenager. He had strange friends and he wore strange clothes and he listened to strange music. Sometimes the mother felt like she was in a zoo. But at nighttime, when that teenager was asleep, the mother opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of the bed. If he was really asleep, he picked up that great big boy and rocked. She picked up that great big boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." That teenager grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a grown-up man. He left home and got a house across town. I'm going to skip towards the end here. While that mother got older, she got older and older and older. One day she called up her son and said, "You'd better come see me because I'm very old and sick." So her son came to see her. And when he came in the door, she tried to sing the song. She sang, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always." But she couldn't finish because she was too sick. The son went to his mother and picked her up and rocked her back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he sang this song, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my mom you'll be." When the son came home at night, he stood for a long time at the top of the stairs. Then he went into the room where his very new baby daughter was sleeping. He picked her up in his arms. And very slowly, he rocked her back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while he rocked her, he sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." Maybe that's why God created our need for sleep. Because here's how I picture it. Every night, God's Spirit comes to us, comes to our room, and He comes into every room of every person of every country in the whole world. Looks at you in your bed, and His Spirit picks you up in His arms, and He rocks you back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and sings to you, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." The gospel of Jesus Christ. Amen.